Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. So far we've learned how to multiply, add, subtract and divide whole numbers. But what about decimals? Now we need to learn how to multiply and divide decimals. We'll start with dividing. Now this is really simple because to divide decimals we just use the same bus stop method that we've been using for whole numbers. All that we need to do is, just like before, make sure that all our place values and decimal points are in line with each other and it will work out fine. So let's just jump straight into this and try and work out 4.13 divided by 4. Just as we've always done with the bus stop method, we just swap the order of them round, write the 4 first, then the bus stop, then the 4.13 on the inside of the bus stop. Now one very important step to the bus stop method whenever either of our numbers is a decimal is to write a second decimal point in our answer section up here. And it's really important to make sure that these two decimal points are in line with each other because otherwise our place values won't line up and we'll get a wrong answer. Anyway, now we can just go ahead as we normally have done and start dividing every place value in the number in our bus stop by the number on the outside of our bus stop. So we'll start with a 4 here. Now 4 fits into 4 one time and there's no remainder, so we'll write a 1 up here and then we won't get any remainder, so we won't have to write any little number down here. Then we can move on to the other side of the decimal point and do 1 divided by 4, which is obviously 0 because 4 can't fit into 1 at all, so we write a 0 up here, and then our remainder is just 1 because we have 1 left over from last time. Now we have 13 divided by 4. Well, 4 can fit into 13 3 times, so we write a 3 up here, add an extra 0 down here and write a 1 up here because our remainder when we divide 13 by 4 is 1. Now we've got 10 divided by 4. Well, 4 can fit into 10 2 times, so we write a 2 up here. That'll make 8, so our remainder is 2. Add another 0, write the 2 here. Move on to the next place value. Now we have 20 divided by 4, which is just 5. Then we don't get any remainder, so our answer is just 1.0325. Okay, so now you can see that whenever we have a division that we need to do and there's decimal points in either one of our numbers here, we can just use the bus stop method just as we have done before and it will always give us the right answer as long as we make sure that our decimal points are aligned at the start. However, there is one problem to this. You can see that if the number on the outside of our bus stop isn't a whole number, it's really difficult to do the bus stop method because when we're calculating remainders, we kind of need this number here to be a whole number. So generally, we should only use this bus stop method when we're dividing a decimal by a whole number. So what do we do if we're dividing a decimal by a decimal? For example, 18.9 divided by 0.09. Well, let's look at an alternate method here that we can use. First of all, we can use our fraction rule to say that 18.9 divided by 0.09 is just equal to 18.9 over 0.09. Then we can use another rule from our lessons on fractions and we can multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. In this case, we're going to multiply them both by 100. And then that will give us a fraction that is equal to the one that we started with. So in this case, we've got 1,890 over 9. Now, what we're trying to achieve here is we're trying to make this numerator and this denominator whole numbers. So you can see that in the top number, we need to move the decimal place across by 1 point, so we could just multiply that by 10. But in the bottom number, we need to move the decimal point across 2 points, which means that we need to multiply it by 100. So, because we have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number in order to keep the fraction the same, we multiply the top and the bottom by 100. If you're not really sure why multiplying by 100 over 100 doesn't change the value of the fraction, it's because whenever we have a fraction like 100 over 100, where the top and the bottom number are the same, it's just equal to 1. And when we multiply 1 by anything, that number just stays the same. I've explained that pretty quickly there, but if you're looking for more detail, I'd really recommend going and looking at the lesson on fractions. Anyway, now we've reached the point where we can say that 18.9 divided by 0.09 is equal to 1,890 over 9. We can then simplify this and we can rewrite this as 630 over 3. Again, if you're not too sure how I've simplified this or what I've done there, go and look at the lesson on fractions. Then I can simplify this again, and I can say that 630 divided by 3 is just equal to 210. And of course, this also means that 18.9 divided by 0.09 is also equal to 210. So to summarize dividing by decimals, if we are dividing a decimal by a whole number, use the bus stop method, and if we're dividing a decimal by a decimal, use this alternate method where we turn them into fractions, then multiply the top and the bottom by 10, 100, 1,000, maybe even 10,000, whatever you need to do to make the numerator and the denominator of the new fraction whole numbers. Then just simplify this fraction until it gives you your answer. Just as a little extra side point for you, if at this stage you're struggling to simplify the fraction, you can actually just turn this fraction back into a division and do the regular bus stop method to work out your final answer. Great, now we can move on to multiplying decimals. For example, let's try and work out the multiplication 2.34 times 6.7. This multiplication would be really easy if both of these things were whole numbers, because then we could just use regular column multiplication. So the easiest way to work out a multiplication like this is to just turn both of them into whole numbers. So 2.34, we need to move the decimal point 2 points to the right, so we can multiply that by 100. Then 6.7, we only need to move the decimal point 1 place to the right, so we can just multiply that by 10. That leaves us with 234 multiplied by 67. Then we can just use regular column multiplication to work out this multiplication. So we write out the two numbers like this, 67 times 234, and then we're just going to start by multiplying every digit in the top number by the rightmost digit in the bottom number. First of all, that's 7 times 4, which is 28. We write the 2 down here and the 8 up here. Then moving on to the second digit in the top number, we've got 6 times 4. Remember, we have to add on the 2 from down here. So 6 times 4 is 24, plus the 2 is 26. I'm going to run through this column multiplication fairly quickly. If you're not sure exactly how to do column multiplication, go and look at the lesson called Multiplying Whole Numbers. Anyway, now we can move on to multiplying every digit in the top number by the second digit in the bottom number. But before we do that, we have to draw a line and add another 0, just like this. Now we can do 7 times 3, which is 21. Write the 2 down here, the 1 here. Then we can do 6 times 3, which is 18, and then add on this 2 here to make 20, and write down the 20 like this. Moving on now, we draw another line, and because this is the second line that we've drawn, we add 2 zeros this time. Then do 7 times 2, which is 14. Write the 1 here, 4 here. And finally, 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 1, which is 13. So we write 13 here, just like this. The last step in our column multiplication is to draw another line just here, and then add up these 3 numbers that we've got using column addition. So starting in the rightmost column here, we've got 8 plus 0 plus 0, which is just 8. In the second column, we have 6 plus 1 plus 0, which is just 7. In the third column, we have 2 plus 0 plus 4, which is 6. In the fourth column, we have 2 plus 3, which is 5. And then finally, we just have a 1 in this last column, so we write a 1 at the front of our answer here. Now we've worked out that 234 multiplied by 67 is equal to 15,678. But this isn't actually what we were trying to work out. We were trying to work out what 2.34 times 6.7 is equal to. If we just rewind the lesson a little bit, you can remember that at the start here, we multiplied 2.34 by 100 and we multiplied 6.7 by 10. So this 15,678 is 100 times 10 times 2 big. So all we need to do to get 2.34 times 6.7 is to divide by 100 times 10. 100 times 10 is just 1,000, so now we can get to our answer by doing 15,678 divided by 1,000, and that's just an easy division. We just have to move the decimal points 3 positions to the left to get 15.678. The process there is that we start with 2 decimals multiplied by each other. We then multiply those decimals by tens, hundreds, thousands to make them both whole numbers. Use regular column multiplication to multiply these numbers together. And then finally, once we've got an answer from our column multiplication, we divide that by the 2 numbers that we multiplied by at the start. Just a little tip for you. When you're multiplying decimals, add up the number of digits after the decimal point in the question. This number tells you the number of decimal places that you should have in your answer. So for example, here we have 1, 2, 3 points after our decimals, so that means that we need 3 decimal points in our answer. Last of all, in this lesson, I'm just going to go through a little method that you can use to make sure that you haven't made any mistakes when you're doing these divisions and multiplications. This is important because it's quite easy to make mistakes when you're using these methods. Now, one thing I should say as well is that you should only use this method once you've already finished the exam and you're checking through your answers. Otherwise, you're just going to spend too long focusing on one question and waste time in the exam. Now, when you are checking through your answers, the method you should use is this. If you divided 2 decimals, multiply your answer by a decimal in the question to check that you get back to the other decimal in the question. That sounds pretty complicated, but I'll just explain it now. For example, if we were dealing with 7.5 divided by 2.5, well, what we do is we turn this into a fraction. We then multiply the top and the bottom of this fraction by 10 to get 75 divided by 25, and then we know that's 3. So we can say that 7.5 divided by 2.5 is equal to 3. But then let's say we finish the exam and we're going back and we're checking our answers. Well, what we do in this case is we pick a decimal from the question. So let's just pick 2.5. And then we'd multiply that by our answer. So we can do 2.5 times 3, which if we just write it as 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5, we can see that that's equal to 7.5. This is great because now we can see that we've got 7.5 here, 7.5 is the other decimal in the question, and we know we've got the right answer. You can also do this with any multiplications. So say for example we had 6 times 4.5. When we're answering this question for the first time in the exam, we'd want to make 4.5 a whole number, so we'd times it by 10 to give us 6 times 45. We know that this is equal to 270, so all that's left now is to divide 270 by the number that we multiplied here at the start, so 270 divided by 10, and that's equal to 27. Now let's say we finished the exam and we're checking through our answers. Well, we can use the same method as before. We just pick a number from the question here. I'm going to pick 6, and this time we can do 6 divided by 27 to see if we get back to 4.5. I'm not going to go through it here, but if you did the bus stop method, this is what you would get, and you can see that this is equal to 4.5, so we know we've got our answer right. I hope this lesson was helpful. Thank you so much for watching.